If you're healthy right now, you probably don't even want to think about it. Maybe you're afraid you'll jinx yourself by even letting your mind wander to a world where you can't run. But if you look at the statistics, anywhere from 50 to 80% of runners will get injured this year, which means there's a good chance it will happen to you. Even if you do everything right, like eating and sleeping well and keeping up with your strength training. Yes, those things will greatly reduce your risk of injury, but nothing is guaranteed. As helpless as it can feel when you're forced to take a break, you can and you will get through it. And if you get through the injury process well, you might even be better off than you were before you got hurt. Welcome to The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and my mission is to help you improve your running, your mindset, and your life with science-backed training and plant-based nutrition. Today, I'll be talking with Cindy Kuzma and Carrie Jackson, who have devoted their careers to helping injured runners. You'll learn specific mental tools and techniques for getting through an injury with your sanity, how to stay active and keep your fitness even if you can't run, and how you can get through an injury and come back better than before. Cindy and Carrie co-host the Injured Athletes Club podcast and are co-authors of Rebound, Train Your Mind to Bounce Back Stronger from Sports Injuries. Cindy has bylines in Runner's World, Self, The New York Times, and more. Carrie is a certified mental performance consultant through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. She's been featured as an expert in numerous publications such as Outside Magazine, Men's Fitness, Women's Health, Runner's World, and the New York Times. Cindy and Carrie have talked to runners at all levels who've been injured and who've bounced back. Their stories, tools, and community are an important resource that you won't know that you'll need until you do. Don't forget to stay tuned all the way to the end of the episode for another Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. And now, here's my conversation with Cindy Kuzma and Carrie Jackson. Welcome to The Planted Runner, Cindy and Carrie.
Thank you for having us.
We're so excited to be here, Claire.
Well, we are going to get into the topic of injuries for runners, and most people don't want to talk about this, but there are a lot of runners getting injured every year. I've heard so many statistics from 50% to 80%. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a lot. And we do everything we can to prevent injuries, but most of us are going to get injured. So what's step one? When we get injured, what should we do?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can tell you what step one usually is versus what it needs to be. It's so funny. Oh my gosh, Cindy, I'm so excited to hear your answer to this too. This will be really interesting. I think step one really is to know that, if you are privileged enough to call yourself a runner for long enough, there's a very good chance that at some point you're going to go through an injury, and that is just part of your athletic journey, and that happens to be where you are on your athletic journey. So I think the first thing to know is that it happens, and nobody wants it to happen, and the timing is never good, but it does happen. And even though at that moment it might not feel like it actually can end up being a blessing. I know everybody's cringing right now that's listening to this and that's injured and is like, whatever, Carrie, I'm done listening. But, and you won't feel like that right now, and you're not supposed to feel like that right now. But eventually, when you get on the other side, there's so many things that you can learn about yourself and so many different ways that you can get stronger from this, that, to trust that. But you're not, what actually happens, like you're not thinking any of that when you first get injured. There's a lot of other things that you're thinking at that moment in time. So I think the very first thing is kind of like, breathe, relax. You don't know what's happening yet. Try and take it day by day. And this is the time to gather information and kind of see and understand what's happening. And you're going to go through an emotional roller coaster, and that's very, very normal too.
Mm-hmm. Usually step one is a lot of swearing.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was like, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say what step one is.
So you mentioned in your book, Rebound, that injured runners actually go through stages of grief, which it's like a death. sometimes. Can you explain?
Yeah, that's actually one of the first things that does happen is the first stage of grief. So this idea of the stages of grief came from the work from Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on her work. She wrote a book on death and dying, and it was about her work with terminally ill patients. And she, through all of her work, recognized that they went through these different phases as they were coming to terms with their terminal illness. And then researchers in the field of sports psychology sort of recognized this similar pattern in injured athletes and sort of took it and did research around that. And so because it is like a loss of a part of yourself. And so in that, you are going through a grieving process. And so the first thing sometimes that people do experience when they get injured is denial, which is the very first stage of the grieving process, which is like a protective mechanism. So it's not a bad thing necessarily. If it continues for a long period of time, then absolutely it gets in the way, but it's a very effective coping mechanism to deal with something that feels like it is unbearable to deal with. So denial is a really important sort of part of that process. So often that's the first thing that happens is like, oh my God, no, this can't be happening. Like, I'm sure it's fine. You kind of deny like, I'll take a couple days off. It's going to be nothing. And it's just a protective sort of mechanism to try and manage the big emotions that you're feeling in that moment. And then from there, the next stage is anger. And that's where you might be, if there was someone else maybe involved in the injury or you're blaming, like there's anger towards others, but there's also anger towards yourself if you're blaming yourself for the situation. And then just angry in general, like angry that you can't do, your body is not doing what you want it to do, and angry that you might be missing out on events. So that's the next phase that you move into. And then you move into bargaining, which is sort of like another form of denial in a way, but it's like, and some people can be in bargaining for a long time. I've been in bargaining for a long time as an injured athlete in the past, where you're sort of like, well, you know what? I just like, if I take a couple weeks off and I really like, I just will enter slow, it'll be fine. I'll be able to get back to the race in time. Or like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, I don't think it's really injured. It's just like, I can still do what I want to do, but I don't need to go take care of it. So bargaining there can be different lengths of time that bargaining happens. And then once you it really starts to sink in like, okay, I am injured. This is happening. That's when the next stage is depression, which there's some sadness around the realization that this is real. This is happening and is impacting me in a really big way. And what's interesting about this stage is it's a good stage to be in. It doesn't feel good, but it's a good stage to be in because it means you're closer to acceptance, which is the final stage, which is like, okay, I would prefer not to be injured, but I am. So what do I want to do? Like, what's my next step? So that's the moving through those stages of grief, because you feel like you're losing your athletic identity. You're losing a part of yourself. And there's so many other losses that happen too, like your stress outlet, your social outlet. There's so many different losses that can come with that. And then, for some of us too, as we're aging athletes, like it also has you looking at bigger grief too, and thinking about your own mortality and your own body, and like, what is it going to be able to do 10 years from now? So there's a lot of losses that can happen. So that's why we sort of liken it to the stages of grief in that way.
Yeah. Cindy, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. I mean, as like Carrie is explaining those things, I'm like, oh, yep. Felt that. And I was just injured again last summer pretty seriously. So these memories are very fresh for me. But another thing that we talk about a lot too is that there are those phases and stages of grief, right? But it's not necessarily always a linear process through them. In some ways, like once you get to acceptance, then a lot of things do become easier. But that's not to say that you don't kind of go back and forth between some of these stages too. And we try to make sure people understand that is all normal. That is all part of the process. And just knowing that and understanding that can make all of this a little bit easier to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not just a physical loss. It's like you were saying, Carrie, it's your identity. I am a runner. I get up every morning at 6 o'clock. I put on my shoes. I go out for a run. What do I do now? I can't run. Who am I?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that's very much what people go through. It's like, well, who am I if I'm not Claire the runner? Like I think that people who aren't maybe runners or athletes don't understand that part of the process, that like loss and that confusion of like, the identity sort of crisis that you go through in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And we have a tendency as humans, but especially as runners, we want everything now. We want to be faster now. We want to be stronger now.
Yes.
We want to be healed now.
Yes.
And that's just, I mean, we can't expect that, obviously, with a serious injury. So how do we, obviously there's physical things that we need to do for recovery, but what are the mental things that we need to do for, our mental recovery?
Well, I mean, you can pick up this great book called Rebound. It's full of mental skills and drills to help you through this process. No, but I think, step one is just recognizing what you said, Claire, that there is an emotional and psychological component to this, and that while some of your emotions can feel out of your control, there is actually a lot you can do to work on your mental skills during this time. And that does give you some feeling of control back, and it also benefits you in the long run when you're getting back to your sport or whatever other challenges you might face in life. Because even if you stay healthy for the rest of your athletic career, chances are you're going to face something else. So I think just understanding that there are things that you can do is a really big step one of the process. And I guess Carrie can talk about what some of the most important things to do at first are, but there are lots of them.
Yeah. Okay, Carrie. What are the first things that we should do?
Yeah, I think part of it is reaching out for support. So there's a tendency to want to isolate during that time for many, many different reasons. And so making sure that you have a really strong support network around you, a strong support system from your medical team to, family and friends, like that you're surrounded by people that are going to support you during this time. And that's one of the reasons why we started the Injured Athletes Club support group on Facebook, because a lot of times, even if you're on a team and you have other people that are athletes and they get how devastating it is, they might not be going through it in that moment. And so to be sort of surrounded by people that are actually going through it in that moment and can see you and understand what you're going through is a really powerful thing to do. I think another thing that is really helpful to do pretty early on is to be very deliberate about redefining your goals so that we can, there's a couple different reasons for that. One is that there's, when you have this idea and vision of what your season's going to look like, and then you get injured and that's no longer available to you, when you don't redefine your goals, there's part of you that's still gauging your feelings of success based on that original expectation, the original vision you had in your mind. So it's really important to be very deliberate about okay, well, what are my goals now? And that all of your energy was going into your sport and going into running, and now all your energy and resources need to go into recovery. So recovery is now your sport, and that is where everything needs to be going, including your goals. So really being deliberate about, working with your coach, working with your medical provider, working with your team to go, okay, well, what are the markers I'm trying to accomplish? So that helps you both with motivation for rehabilitation and confidence that you're going to get through this. And then also it gives you something to focus on, so you can focus on something that is in your control in this moment in time. And then it gives you markers to celebrate. We're really big in the Injured Athletes Club about celebrating milestones and recognizing those. So those are a couple of the really, really key, critical, important things to do in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. The self-isolation thing, I think, is a big one actually to talk about because, okay, number one, we isolate ourselves because we don't want to be the complainers. We don't want to be the Debbie Downers. We don't want people to feel bad for us. And then the other reason we isolate is because honestly, we're jealous. We don't want to be around people who are running and happy and doing all the things that we used to do. Those are two really strong, emotions that I just want to crawl up under the covers, So how do we break through that?
It's so challenging. And again, as someone who's been injured many times, I've gone through this a lot. A couple things. One is that, when we interview athletes about this, a lot of times they'll say they feel that initial urge to isolate, but once they just push through it a little bit, say, you decide to go to a race. This happened to me last summer. I was training for a marathon and I didn't want to go to the race that I couldn't run, but we had plans to do it anyway. My other friends were running and I was like, all right, fine, I'll go. And once I got there, I was really glad I was there. I was still sad to not be running, but even though kind of getting there was a little bit gutting, that experience was so fulfilling in a way that I couldn't necessarily have anticipated. And we hear that again and again, like going, spectating, supporting your runner friends in other ways, crewing for them, cheering for them, taking a big flag, being out there on the sideline. I mean, think about how much that means to you when you're running a race, and being able to give that to someone else, even when it's hard, is actually really rewarding. I mean, that's what we do. We're athletes. We do hard things. We overcome our internal resistance to doing the things that we don't want to do. And then we reap the benefits. And so if you kind of take that mindset to it, it can be so much more fulfilling if you give yourself a chance. And I understand why it is so hard. And I'm not saying that everyone can get there in one big leap, but just consider the possibility that it might be more fulfilling than you expect. And another, yeah. And another thing that really resonated with me, we had Dimity McDowell from Another Mother Runner on our podcast recently, and she is amazing, and she cannot run at all. And she is not only does she have this identity as an athlete, but she's created a community around the sport. And hearing her talk about what she does in the moment when she sees runners out there, she still feels that jealousy, but she thinks to herself, may you run well, may you be well. She sends that message to them. It's like a little bit of it can sound a little like spiritual or woo-woo, but she said it just like brings her such peace to recognize those feelings and like just send a piece of goodwill out to them that she would hope that someone would send to her too. So those are some things that might help with that.
I love that. And speaking of woo-woo stuff, let's talk about how to turn this into an opportunity, shall we? So you said earlier that, it can be a good thing to be injured, which most people are like, So let's see, how can we spin this into an opportunity, Carrie?
Yes, it is like the way I like to describe it to people, and we talk about this in the book too, in Rebound, is that I liken it to being on a hero's journey. So the hero's journey is the work of Joseph Campbell. And the idea is that, all of these stories that he in his work, he was looking at, sort of there's this archetypal story that happens with a lot of different sort of stories that were passed on over time. And now we'll see it in movies. We'll see it in movies like Hunger Games or Lord of the Rings or what else, like Harry Potter or Wizard of Oz, that there's a person that's sort of the is someone that's an ordinary person that's being brought into an extraordinary world. And that is our hero, and they go through their hero's journey. And so that is you as the athlete. You are on your own hero's journey, on your own big athletic journey map. So what happens when we're injured is it's such a, impactful and devastating thing that can happen that it's almost like we're looking through that, experience it through a microscope and all we can see is the devastation of it. But when you pull back and look at your entire journey as an athlete, then you can see like, oh, this is just where I am right now. It doesn't mean that I cease being an athlete. Because that's the thing that people really struggle with is like, if I can't do the thing, that means I'm not the thing anymore. Like if I can't run, that means I'm not a runner anymore. If I can't do my sport, it means I'm not an athlete anymore. That's not what it means. It means this is where you're at on your journey. So in the hero's journey, it's cyclical. So you're called into an extraordinary world and you face all these trials and tribulations, and then you get to the hardest battle that you have to go through. And then you come out the other side and you're a different person because of it. So it's not even like you're trying to get back to who you were before. You can't, because you're a different person and a different athlete because of going through this experience. So that's a kind of a big part, like a broad stroke of how do I turn this obstacle into an opportunity. And it's so fascinating too, because we've interviewed so many different athletes on the podcast and for the book, and independently of each other, we'll have people tell us like, I wouldn't want to go through this again, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I am so grateful for this experience because of what it has brought to my life and who I am now because of it. So it's hard. You can't have that perspective until you're on the other side. But if you're in the middle of an injury right now, just knowing that is what happens for other people, sometimes you can trust that. If you can't feel it for yourself right now, you can trust, well, I do trust that is other people's experience, and maybe that's what I can hold on to right now.
Yeah, you have a lot of cool stories in the book. And, Cindy, you're the journalist, so I'm sure you were collecting a lot of these stories and bringing them to life. Do you have any examples that you can share with us, some of your favorites of athletes who have rebounded?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many, it's hard to narrow it down.
I know.
Gosh, I mean, we talked to 50 athletes for the book, and then we're on episode, I think, 85 next week on the podcast. So there's so many that we've talked to, but, a runner who sticks out to me both for her physical accomplishment in overcoming and also her thoughtfulness about the process is Hillary Allen. She's a trail runner, a sky runner, and she had a really traumatic, injury where she fell off a cliff 150 feet during a race. And it wasn't clear that she would survive, but she did. And she was back to racing actually 10 months later. And it was a very difficult process for her. And of course, she had some setbacks after that too. But, that sort of belief in the process and taking one small step at a time and getting to a point that she could never have imagined 10 months prior, like to race again so soon after that sort of an accident. I find it so incredible. And in part because she kind of almost had let go of that as a goal. She was like, all I'm going to do is show up every day and do what I can do every day. And some days that's going to be more than others. Some days I'm really depressed and I can hardly do anything. Other days I can feel like I can really dedicate myself to rehab. But she just kind of somehow in all of the emotional challenge, and there are a lot of ways that she talks about both on our podcast, in our book, and she has her own incredible book called Out and Back, which I think is a must read for an athlete going through a difficult situation like this. She was just so thoughtful about how she gave herself the opportunity every day to make progress. And in the end, it added up to more than she could have imagined, both in her racing accomplishments and also in what Carrie was just talking about, her being like a more grateful, well-rounded person, wanting to give back in even more ways than she already did. So her story is always one that stands out to me, especially for runners.
Yeah, it's super inspiring. Lots of the stories are inspiring, but beyond just hearing people who got through it, you offer some real help to people. It's like kind of rehab for your brain on how to mentally get through this. You actually lay out quite a few mental drills to help runners who are injured get through this difficult process. Carrie, can you talk about some of those?
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so many, and I love them all, obviously, because like I use them all with my clients. But like, there are a few actually that stand out quite a bit, and there's three in particular that immediately come to mind. And one is called Go Far. So the idea with Go Far is an acronym for Feel, Accept, Recover. So it sort of helps going through that, like moving through the grief process or moving through denial to acceptance. So Go Far, as any athlete that has been injured will tell you, the recovery is as much mental as it is physical, and you are sent on a giant emotional roller coaster. And so if you want to go far in your recovery, the first thing you have to do is feel your feelings. So F is for feel. You really have to allow yourself to feel all of the feelings that you're feeling. And we're not always good at labeling those emotions. We sometimes kind of, our brain likes to clump things into categories. And so we're not always very good at being accurate with the emotion that we're feeling. And so that's another thing we have in the book is the emotion decoder. So you can look at like, okay, you can just go down the list of all these different emotions and go, oh, that's what it is. That's what I'm feeling. Because there's power in once you can accurately label it and touch it, it helps you move through that emotion once you really allow yourself to feel it and recognize what it is. So feel is the first. And then A is Go Far, Feel, Accept, Recover. So now that you've felt your feelings, you can accept like, okay, this is what's happening. I accept where I am. I accept what I need to do. And now what, right? Recover is the now what do I do? But you have to feel your feelings in order to move through that process. So that's one that stands out quite a bit. Another one that I love and stands out is one that, that sometimes when people read the book, they're like, I don't know if I'm going to do that one. Like, I'm not so sure I want to partake in the writing a letter to my injury, Carrie and Cindy. And so this one I love, I mean, for so many reasons, because I know it can be impactful, but also because sometimes people that are the most skeptical of it do it and then go, oh my gosh, I can't even believe what came out of that exercise, and I had no idea. So this one, the first step of it requires you to give your injury a name. So this is Peggy Sue, my left shoulder here. Her name is Peggy Sue. And we're working together right now through an injury. So what this does, when you personify your injury, you give it a name. Now when you relate to your injury, you relate to it in a completely different way, through a totally different filter. So to create some psychological distancing is what we're achieving by doing that. So instead of me referring to just being internal with the experience and just getting angry with my shoulder, or referring it to my good shoulder and my bad shoulder, this is Peggy Sue, and that's how I talk to her. So the first thing is you give your injury a name, and then you write a letter to your injury and ask all the questions that you have on your mind, or say whatever it is that's on your mind. And we have some prompts in the book for that. And then the injury writes a letter back in response to the original letter that you wrote. And people are often some people are super excited immediately, and they're like, oh my gosh, this sounds like a great idea. And other people are like, I'm not going to do that, Carrie.
Yeah, sure.
So, and that's one of the reasons why we have so many tools in the book, because there are things that are going to really work well and resonate with one person differently than another. But that is definitely one of my favorite drills. And I know Cindy has her own favorite drills in the book too.
Yeah, Cindy?
Yeah, one of my favorites is one called energy conservation, which I think about it so much when I am injured and I'm kind of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting that phase of beating myself up for all of the things that I did to contribute to my injury, or I'm worried about the doctor's appointment I have or the scan that I have, or I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to be able to run this race. When you start to get caught in those loops, you're expending so much energy into places that don't have anything to do with where you are right now and how you can manage your recovery moving forward. So it's really easy to get caught in those. And I find just sitting down and actually visualizing, for me, you can picture it any way you like, but I always picture it those balls where you kind of touch them and they have light inside and the light goes to where your fingers are. I kind of picture those lightning sort of bolts, those lights, rays of light going in all different directions. And then I just visualize them coming back in and coming back to me and focusing on where I am right now. Like Carrie said, feel, accept, recover. Okay, I've accepted this is where I am now. What do I do to actually get moving on my recovery versus worrying about all these things? I mean, it's not to say that you shouldn't take a look at the, things you might need to work on or change, but just in that moment, bringing your energy back to yourself so you have more control at that moment. So that's one that, again, I wasn't sure about, but once I tried it, I found it surprisingly powerful.
I love all of these because obviously they are helpful when you're injured, but this is all really good stuff for when you're not injured too. Mm-hmm. When there are negative things happening in your life or when you're running hard, the Peggy Sue shoulder is very similar to what I do when I'm running hard and I get negative thoughts. That's negative Nancy. I know that's not very creative. Yes. But Nancy is always on the bus, but I don't let her drive, and so I give my negative voice a complete personality. I can describe her to the T, and again, it's because I separate that from myself, which is why it works. So it's so cool that you can apply that to probably anything, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes I'll change my negative thoughts into someone else's voice. So I'll have someone else be the narrator, like Samuel L. Jackson or Matthew McConaughey. And then it's just takes on a whole life of its own, right? So negative Nancy is a great idea. Yes.
I'm doing Matthew McConaughey next. That is for sure. I love that. How can you be mad at Matthew McConaughey's sweet voice? Oh my God, that is so perfect. Well, I did want to bring up one title of the chapter of one of your chapters, if I can say that right. It's you're special, but you're not special. And I love that because I say this to my kids all the time. I say, you're special, just like everyone else. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I would love for you to kind of explain what that means.
Yeah, I think it's funny too because I remember when we came up with that, and there was still part of me that was like, "Oh, but you are. I don't take this the wrong way." Like,
Yeah.
but I think I think for both of us, like one of the things we wanted to impart is that like everybody's injury journey is unique, and it's one of the things that's really hard sometimes is that when you're working with your medical providers or your coaches or whoever, and sometimes they just see an injury and don't see the person that's connected to the injury. And so you are unique, even though, this person, maybe he has seen thousands of, torn ACLs or whatever it is. This is you and your torn ACL and your experience, and you are special because of that. However, you're also not special because you are not the only person that's ever gone through this. You're not the only person that's ever been injured, and this is very often not for everybody. We have actually met some athletes that have not been injured, but
including Claire, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I know, that's me.
So it does, it's not a guaranteed part of your athletic journey, but there's a high likelihood, right? When you push your body to its limit, sometimes you're going to find where that limit is. And so that was the part that's like, but you're not special. Like, and also sort of normalizing some of the things that you're going through as well. It's like, yes, your experience is unique, and yes, you are not alone. And there are a lot of other people that have gone through those exact emotional experiences that you are going through right now.
Yeah. And that piece of it feels really important too, because I think a lot of times we as athletes struggle with the grief and the disappointment and the frustration that we do feel. We feel like sometimes that maybe we're not entitled to that, or like other people in our lives might even say, well, gosh, it's not like you have, a terrible disease, or you're probably going to get back. People will kind of try to minimize some of these emotions, and that whether you're doing that to yourself or you're having other external voices that are trying to do that for you, we find that that's not very helpful in recovery, and that there's enough sympathy and empathy to go around. And in fact, when people, including injured athletes, go through hard things, they again, often access deeper wells of empathy for other people and are more willing to connect with other people who are going through hard things. So it's just the idea that that other people are having these emotions and that's normal and you can have them. So you're not special in that way, but you are special enough to care about something and be sad when it is missing from your life.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah, because sometimes the athletes will even be dismissive of their emotional experience and feel like, oh my gosh, how could I, why am I even feeling like this? It's not my profession. It's not like I'm losing sponsorships, although some of them are, but I hear that a lot. And it's like, oh, you're still, exactly what Cindy's saying. Like you're, this is still an emotional experience for you. This is something that's really important and is a big part of your life. Like it doesn't matter that you're, that it's not your profession, and it doesn't matter that other people are going through something that is more challenging right now. Like you are going through this and it is an emotional experience, and it's okay for it to be an emotional experience.
Well, one very real emotional part of it is a lot of runners or athletes in any sport, but especially running, a lot of us go for a run because of our mental health. We feel better after a couple miles of running or whatever it is. That is our release valve, our stress valve. That's our alone time. It's not just about performance. It's about this actually does make my life better mentally. And so let's get into real practical. So, okay, let's use the ACL example. I have a torn ACL. I can't run. What do I do for my mental health? Forget about recovery, but just day to day, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah. So I'm working with an athlete right now that's struggling with this, and she happens to be a runner. And it's hard because when that's like so much of your life and your mental health goes into that thing, it's possible that you haven't developed other tools in your toolbox to be able to utilize for your mental health. And so that's the first piece, is just exploring what that could be, because sometimes you have no idea, because that this has been the thing, and this has been the what's served you for so long, and you didn't need to work on anything else. Right now you do. And so it's an opportunity in that way to start looking at, well, what else provides me joy? So that's one of the things I'll do. And one of the things we're working on actually together is creating her joy list, which is like just a list of 8 to 10 different things that bring you joy, that you do for no other reason but pure pleasure. Because managing stress is an important part of recovery, because we know that stress can impede the healing process. So being very deliberate about part of your recovery plan is to experience joy and to, and to lessen your stress and to experience happiness and laughter. So, and the mini joy list is like, why, the reason this is helpful is because if you haven't thought about it, this is just an experiment. We're just going to write some stuff on a piece of paper and see how it feels. Because it can feel really overwhelming in that moment when you're like, I don't know what else to do and I'm freaking out. So just brainstorming the smallest things like going to have tea on your deck outside, or, sitting down to read a magazine, putting on your headphones and listening to your favorite album, like whatever it is. One of mine is I always have a thing of bubbles laying around and I'll go outside and blow bubbles, right? You can't be mad when you're blowing bubbles. You just can't. Like I've tried. It's amazing. So whatever those things are, but being deliberate about putting them into your training plan, which your training plan right now is your recovery. So that's one thing to do when so much of your mental health was connected to this thing that you can't do anymore. It's really important to think about. So it's such a great question, Claire. Like, well, what else can I do to help myself there because of that?
And support is a big piece too, having that support system that we talked about. And we talk about this in Rebound, and it's true of all kinds of challenges. I think you need like 4 different kinds of support. You need tangible support, like someone, carrying your stuff if you have crutches. You need motivational support, someone to kind of cheer you on in your rehab. You need informational support, which is like what you might get from your healthcare provider. But you also need emotional support, just someone to listen to you and tell you that they get it. And that's where, things like our Facebook group or other groups of injured athletes or other people who will offer you that are really important too. And like Carrie said, being deliberate about asking for that, asking for what you need. Sometimes we expect other people to be able to read our minds and know the exact types of support that we need when we need it. When in reality, sometimes they don't know. They want to help us, but they don't know how. And us telling them how we need support and them offering it doesn't diminish the value of that support, So that's really important too. And then I think just movement, when usually if you have surgery or something like that, you'll have physical therapy, you'll have movement that you're required to do, but doing a kind of movement. And again, you want to work with your healthcare providers to make sure that you're not overdoing it, because you are going to need more recovery to heal whatever it is that is injured. But keeping some kind of movement on a regular basis in your routine, like just moving your body in space, even if it's someone else moving your body, even if it's getting stretched out or a massage or something like that, like there is something really valuable. Like sometimes you just have to realize that, okay, running was such a great complete package. I could get so much of what I needed in one run, but now I might need to do 4 or 5 different things to like replicate all the benefits of running. I mean, that's how great running is. Sometimes it takes that much of a breakdown, but being creative and having a little bit of curiosity about what it is that can fill those roles too actually just also helps shift your mindset into a more positive view. Instead of just dwelling on everything that you're missing, it becomes a little bit more of a fun, not fun necessarily, but a challenge or a puzzle versus just kind of a pit of despair. At least that's what I found.
Yeah, Cindy, I'm glad you brought that up because, let's go back to the ACL thing. So you got one leg that you can't walk on that one leg. What else can you do instead of focusing on what you can't do? What could you do? Some seated workouts? Could you swim? Could you do something else? There are a lot, actually, if you get on YouTube, there are a lot of seated workouts that would challenge just about anyone. So, there are ways to move. There are ways to get your heart rate up. There are ways to get really, really strong. Runners, we just run and kind of like half-ass it at the gym. At least most people do. But, again, opportunity. We could take this opportunity to build a killer core or work on our glutes. There's so many physical things that most people can still do even with a debilitating injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's part of getting to acceptance too, because you'll see athletes sometimes swing on that sort of all or nothing pendulum. Well, if I can't do the workout I want to do, then I'm not going to do anything. Instead of like, oh, but what can you do? Right. I mean, exactly what you said, Claire. Like when you're injured, it's so easy to focus on all the things you can't do. And when you're doing that, you're still fighting. You're fighting against accepting that you're injured. And so once you get to acceptance, then you might go, it is worth it to move your body in any way, even though it's not your preferred way. And you would prefer to be able to run. That's not available to you. So what do you want to do? And so, yeah, to just not, I see so many people struggle with that all or nothing. I'm like, well, it's not even worth it. If I can only, run for 5 minutes, like, oh, it is worth it. That's part of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the next struggle I think that's important to talk about is, okay, so we're injured, we go through the whole journey, we come out on the other side, the pain's gone, we're good to go, we're getting back into our sport that we love. So many people come to me, athletes of mine, and say, yeah, I was injured 2 years ago and I'm still scared to go fast at the track. I am terrified I'm going to get injured, or I want to run this race, but I'm probably not going to go 100% because I had that injury and I just don't ever want to go back there again. How do we get through that?
Yeah, it's a very normal response to being injured. That it's another place where we see sort of the emotional roller coaster come up. It's like at the onset, when you hit setbacks, and then when you get back to high intensity training and competition. And so when you get to that point in your recovery, it's very natural for your brain to want to protect your body. So you're not quite trusting that your body's ready. So this happens with a lot of athletes where you're physically cleared, but you're not mentally cleared, right? You haven't done the work to really work on your confidence and your focus and your motivation going back into that high intensity training and competition. And so that's, a big part of why we did the book is those are the tools that you need to do as you are healing physically so that you feel more confident once you get to that point. So a lot of it, it's your triggering your stress response in that moment as a protective mechanism. And there are tools that both need to relax the body or the physiological response of the stress response, and then also relax the mind, which is the psychological impact that creates the stress response. You have to work on both ends to kind of throw a wrench in that negative feedback loop, that fear loop that's trying to protect you. So once you have some tools to be able to work with that, then your brain and your body can be at the same place at the same time, meaning like you're physically ready, you've been cleared, everybody know, like your doctors are saying you can do this, your coach is saying you can do this, and now you believe it too.
Yeah. And there's a couple of specific exercises in the book that maybe we could share too, and maybe your athletes would appreciate them, Claire. One of them is the anxiety pyramid. So, if you have someone who got injured in a specific situation, like say during a track workout or during a race, and that is the thing that brings them the most anxiety, maybe you don't have to get there all at once. Think about that as the top of the pyramid, but there are probably some steps between here and there. Like maybe it's if they got injured doing a 200-meter rep, maybe it's a little bit longer but slower rep that they do building up to that. Or, maybe it's a different distance of race, like actually a longer race, so they'd be going a little bit slower. Or, are there there's almost always like intermediate steps along the way toward whatever the situation is or was that brings you the most anxiety. So can you kind of map those out, do one at a time, build a little bit of confidence, and then eventually get to that point where you realize that you are physically and mentally aligned and in a different place than you were before you got injured.
I love it. It's just like building fitness, baby steps, one thing at a time. It's building back. Again, we want everything yesterday, and that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, perfect. Cindy and Carrie, it's been a pleasure. Before we go, Cindy, why don't you tell us where we can find you?
Sure. Well, personally, I am at Cindy Kuzma on Instagram and Twitter and all of the things. And I have a website, cindykuzma.com. And collectively, we have a website that's theinjuredathletesclub.com. And there you'll find links to our book, our podcast, our Facebook group, or you can just search Facebook for the Injured Athletes Club. And yeah, that's where you can find us. And wherever you get your podcasts as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for being here. I know this is really helpful to anyone who is currently injured or anyone who will be injured in the future, which is just about all of us. And now it's time for the Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. Today's topic is play the long game. By definition, long-distance running takes time. We are tempted to want to get results as quickly as possible. At the beginning, we do tend to improve rapidly, but at some point, our progress can slow. For others, the beginning is the hardest part, and results can seem to take forever. But if we try to force our fitness with one more rep, running faster than intended, or more often than our body can handle, we actually slow our progress. And if we get injured, that that will set back everything. So play the long game. Aim for sustainable and consistent efforts with your fitness and your nutrition. Don't try to get better every day. Try to get better every year by doing manageable training with good recovery every day. Thank you so much for listening to the Planted Runner podcast or watching it on YouTube. Don't forget that your Apple Podcast review automatically enters you in our monthly contest. One lucky winner will get a signed copy of the Planted Runner book each month this year. So head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review, and you're automatically entered to win. Your reviews are the biggest factor in the success of this show, and I read every single one. Have a great run today.